deemed university where we have a number of departments, and here we do multidisciplinary research. And with a proposal of Industry 4.0 from Government of India, this multidisciplinary research gives us much of the scope to know about all the concepts. Being a biomedical engineer, I should have some background in electronics and some background in IoT so that I can interact with people from other streams, tell my problems and get solutions. So that is what we encourage at our institute. So today I'll be talking about IoT in medical applications. So medical devices in general, I'm going to give a short brief about medical devices. And since this workshop is completely focused on IoT, you are all aware of IoT. I'm just going to link how this IoT and medical devices going to seamlessly work together, and a case study on my research where a nanotechnology based sensors for non-invasive diagnosis. So through exhale breath, there are a number of sources for non-invasive diagnosis. Okay, exhale breath, eye tear, sweat, urine sample, poop sample. So all these are non-invasive samples to diagnose disease. Specifically, I'll discuss about the exhale breath and the role of IoT in exhale breath sensors. Okay, so you can imagine as an alcohol meter which is currently in existence. Okay, you can imagine the same here, and we can walk through to the presentation. So yes, when I'm going to say medical devices, any medical device you come across, you try to fit into these three things: either the diagnostic equipment or a therapeutic equipment or an assistive equipment. Any medical device you come across, you try to fit into any of these three categories. Okay, so what are those diagnostic equipment? So it is going to identify the problem within a human body. Okay, so if I tell radiological techniques, so what are some examples of radiological techniques? So a CT, okay, a computer tomography, an MRI, an X-ray. Okay, if it is a dental X-ray, it is going to give an X-ray film that captures the internal organs of internal parts of dental organs. Okay, bones and structures, all those things. So similarly, there are 5 to 6 radiological technique, an endoscopy, a colonoscopy, all images the internal organs of the body. If I talk about X-ray, so what is going to happen? X-ray will be passed within the human body, and beyond, after the human body, there will be an X-ray film. So if the structure is hollow, if there is no bone on the film, it is going to be black in color. If it gets attenuated by bone, that is, if bone stops the X-ray to pass on the other side, the representation will be in white color, right? So with this, doctors identify fractures or airline cracks, something like that. Similarly, we have number of radiological techniques. Radiological technique in general, you imagine that it is going to capture the inner organs. So once the image comes, the physicians or the doctor will see that report, and they will come to a conclusion on the diagnosis of any disability, or with that report or information, they will decide on how to move on to the progress. Okay, how do one can progress on the treatment for this particular illness. And the next broad category of diagnostic equipment is vital parameter sensor. So vital parameter sensor, in the sense, we can say blood pressure. So that is measuring a vital parameter from our body. Okay, so blood pressure sensor, and a number of sensors, cardiac output. So cardiac output, in the sense, a heart needs to pump a particular ml of blood in a minute. So that cardiac output flow will be measured with some medical devices, and those are all vital parameters of our body. Even the human body temperature is a very important vital parameter. So the thermometer is a vital parameter sensor. And next, where our focus of discussion would be here is on the detection of biomarkers. As on the title slide, I was talking about numerous samples, right? Non-invasive samples. So each and every sample from the human body gives the hint. Okay, it hints what is happening within. Okay, so it tells about the fundamental mechanism. For example, okay, the common test, the blood test, right? Glucose, it has been measured, right? That tells about the fundamental body mechanism, right? So I'll discuss this briefly. So how glucose above the prescribed limit is within the body. Okay, so there is pancreas. You don't have to go much deep on this biochemical things. I'm just giving you a hint on what is it and how the fundamental body mechanism is being detected. Okay, so blood test we are talking about. On the blood test, I'm detecting glucose and how it is happening, how it is exactly this blood is reflecting the fundamental body mechanism. We are trying to find answers for that thing. Okay, so to begin with, there is an organ called pancreas. That pancreas is secreting insulin. Whenever we take food intake, right? Whenever we eat food, what happens? This, you imagine cell as a lock and insulin as a key. Okay, so whenever we take intake, all the breaking down of the food particles and it has been transferred to an energy called glucose. Okay, so this insulin, no, this key, what it does is it opens the lock. Which is the lock? The cell here. So once the lock has been opened, this glucose is into the cells of the human body. The cells is a basic functional unit. Okay, so once energy is gone, okay. Now, what do you understand here? Without insulin, the lock cannot be opened. That is, the cell cannot be opened, and the energy in the form of glucose cannot enter in, and we cannot function. Right. So, if it does not open, what happens? This glucose will stay in blood. So, like this, each and every biomarker. So, if I say I measure cholesterol, for cholesterol we have HDL, high density cholesterol, low density cholesterol, and total cholesterol. For thyroid, okay, T4, T3. So all these are biomarkers that is being identified, detected from the blood. Why this appears in blood? Because there are certain biochemical reaction that is happening it. So biomarkers in general represent the fundamental body mechanism. Similarly, the breath samples would represent some fundamental body mechanism. So identifying a particular biomarker related to a particular disease. So why I am stressing on these things are, as during the yesterday's talk by the professor from IIT, the first session, I heard that the basic component of an IoT he insisted is the first one, the sensors, right? So I'm stressing much on the detection of biomarkers here. Okay. So these are all the some categories of diagnostic equipment. Next, we'll move on to therapeutic equipment. Therapeutic equipment in the sense, an equipment which is used to treat an illness. All the surgical instruments comes under therapeutic equipment.
Hello, namaskar, sir.
Ma'am, shall I proceed or somebody's... Okay, so the next set of equipment, medical devices, therapeutic equipment, there we have surgical instruments as well as an infusion pump. So basically you understand a therapeutic equipment is one that is used to treat any illness. And the next kind of medical device is assistive equipments. So assistive devices in the sense it is going to help a subject on something. Hearing aid is helping a patient to let them hear. Okay. Similarly, you can even take an eye lens or a glass, no, that is assisting them to have a longer vision or a vision in the nearby. Similarly, a pacemaker helps a heart to beat, to initiate the beat. Okay, and wheelchairs is an assistive device, right? So whatever medical devices you come across, you try to fit into any of these categories, either diagnostic equipment, therapeutic equipment, or assistive equipment. Okay, a ventilator is an assistive equipment, right? It assists patients to breathe. So IoT plays a major role in diagnostic equipment. because diagnostic equipment in general, it is sensors, the first primary component of the Internet of Things. Okay, radiological equipment, all the X-rays, they are actually a sensor, right? A camera is a sensor. It is detecting, it is sensing something and gives us a report. So all the diagnostic equipment are sensors, and sensors, this diagnostic equipment has a major role in Internet of Things. Okay, and similarly, there are IoT and therapeutic equipments linked, and IoT and assistive equipments are linked together, but the applications are limited in these two categories. We'll discuss that just give an idea of how IoT and these two devices are linked. For example, there is a sensor in, say, a ventilator. Okay, all the sensors in a state or a country, there are some sensors, and it is going to tell us the coordinates, the global positioning system. Okay, it is going to tell us the coordinates of its presence and how it is utilized. For example, in this COVID situation, there are lack of ventilators in most of the places, and there are ventilators which are not in demand. They are still existing, so we can effectively manage this logistics. Okay, so IoT plays a role in managing logistics of assistive devices and therapeutic devices. Okay, in this kind of pandemic or epidemic, but in general, diagnostic equipment and IoT goes well together. And there is a fourth type of medical devices. Rather calling it a medical device, we can simply call it as any kind of equipment that is going to give superpower to the human being. For example, this equipment, right? This is named as Ostrich Bionic Arm. You can buy this in Amazon, Flipkart, or any kind of e-commerce websites. So this helps a human to run faster. Okay, so these kind of superpowers, these are generally a medical device. This is kind of fitness equipment. Okay, it accelerates the human being at a for fast transportation. Okay, so these three are very important, and diagnostic equipment and IoT goes well together. That is the takeaway from this slide. Yes, with Internet of Things and healthcare together, there are new terms that we can find in the internet. That is Internet of Medical Things, as well as Internet of Healthcare Things. So a very dedicated space is allocated for Internet of Things in the application of healthcare. Okay. So in general, I'll discuss very shortly about what Internet of Things is. Internet of Things, it is a combination of hardware and software, right? Which is capable of transmitting or receiving data where not directly over a cloud. Okay. So transmitting and receiving data, combination of hardware and software capable of transmitting and receiving data over cloud. So with this data, right, in the cloud, it is also, that hardware is also designed to process the data and come up with a decision or a unique task, any task to be performed. Okay. So we have keywords here, hardware and software, that should be capable of transmitting and receiving data through which any common cloud. So with this data in the cloud, the hardware and the software should coherently work together and process these data to come up with a decision and perform any task. Okay. So with this in mind, with these keywords in mind, we'll see 2 to 3 examples of how this is coherently working other from medical devices. So, okay, and the second thing, being an autonomous vehicle, it will identify where is the nearest charging station, and it will autonomously drive towards a specific charging device. So what happens? It senses with the battery level, it identifies where is the next charger location, and it makes decision on rerouting towards that particular charging station, right? So here we have identified it is a combination of hardware and software. That is very important here. So yes, this is Internet of Things is multidisciplinary based on the application we go. If we go for that is EVs, electric vehicles, So it is a combination of an electrical engineer there, an electronics engineer, a computer science or data science engineer. Okay, it is combination. Nowadays, all the applications are being multidisciplinary. So it is mandatory that we know some ideas here and there. So these are just examples other than medical devices which I am talking about, how it is working seamlessly together. Okay. So yes, now coming to e-health to m-health or something like that. So after independence, right? After independence, we are short of all the telephones and something like that, right? So initially there are a lot of failed attempts on health data batch processing, meaning that patients comes to the hospital, each their demographic data and all their informations are stored in a pen and paper system. Okay, and the receptionist would not be aware of what are the facilities that are available for the treatment. So what are the facilities that have been utilized? Okay, so based on that only the receptionist can take a decision on whether admitting them immediately or suggesting them some other hospitals with some facilities, right? So this is what the scenario is after independence. So during 1967, Technicon, it is an it is an industry from California. So that is the first successful patient information system. What it does is it has information of all the patients. Somewhere between 80 hospitals run the same software. Okay, so that what are the facilities available in all the 80 hospitals and what are the patients and their patient details getting what kind of treatment in particular hospitals are being recorded, and it is being centralized so that hospital 70 can see what is happening in hospital 20, what are the facilities that are available. Similarly, on the other hand, patient information is being known. So these are what the yearly a hospital information system, that is hospital management information system. Recently after 1990s, we have heard across a lot of terms. The first one is e-health, m-health, telehealth, telemedicine. So these terms you would have come across a lot of times on the internet, right? E-health, m-health, telehealth, and telemedicine. So all these four terms are more or less similar, but the service that it provides differ a little. This is not a mandatory unique definition, but all are similar together. E-health in the terms that it uses electronic health records. Okay, the Technicon example which you have seen, right? So that is e-health. M-health in the sense the patient has the mobile application or any of their vital parameters they can see in the mobile and get advice from the doctors by transmitting those data to the physician, all those things. And telehealth is a broader perspective of telemedicine. Telemedicine in general, it is a remote clinical service. Somewhere in some place where doctors cannot travel or something like that, in remote places. So okay, this telemedicine exists. Telehealth is a broader picture of telemedicine. So there are no any unique definitions for these, but all these four represents the same common thing. And we are in 3G plus 4G in this era. We are moving to 5G, and similarly at the particular track, IoT, we can expect that in a bigger future. Okay, so all this are seamlessly coming together, and it is amazing, and it is very curious to know about all these things when they reach at a particular point. And the advantages of Internet of Things in healthcare would be it enables preventive care, right? Through early detection, you will that particular sensor rather than human intervention. What happens generally when a patient is in any ICU, the nurse will go and take all the vital parameters periodically. So there may be a possibility of human error. And the other advantage, okay, we say there's no human error as well. And the other advantage is, okay, manually we can have certain time interval and we can measure the parameters. But we have some sensors, that is wearable sensors or something like that. For all the whole 24 hours, some data will be some vital parameters will be extracted, right? So that any minute change in that vital parameters can be detected earlier itself, right? When for all the 24 hours, some data has been monitored. And you can take an example of Apple Watch, which measures the heart rate as well, the ECG. So all these have come to mobile applications and even smartwatches, right? Google Lens is one of the best example, which the research and development team from Google is working further, right? To make it sense something throughout the or throughout the day. Okay, so we have a seamless data acquisition. So the patient care would be seamless, right? And this is the key for IoT in medical devices. So once this all has been achieved, that is seamless data acquisition, then we can provide the right treatment to the right patient at the right time in the right place. Even if we cannot access the patient, we can go for telemedicine, right? And the challenges here is security and privacy, okay, healthcare reforms and mandates, and adoption of this technology for the whole country. It would that even would take a whole lot of, even a decade, we can say, okay. And the primary thing is how the sensor is performing. Initially, ECG, we will have 3 leads, one on the right hand, left hand. On the chest leads, we have some systems. In the sense, how do I say is, you imagine that as a sensor, a patch like thing, a sellotape like thing, so that we place it on the number of parts on the human body. Now what happens now? You just place your 2 fingers, like how you place your finger in the fingerprint sensor on your mobile phone. You place your 2 finger and you get your ECG. So how does this happen? Based on the sensor performance. So these are the challenges we are facing. And imagine the amount of data that we generate. Okay, from single subject, you imagine the amount of data that will be generated. So we need a large cloud storage for all these things, and we need data scientists to process all these data. Okay, so these are the challenges we will face. Now I'll focus on this sensor performances challenges. I will give you a case study of designing a sensor, okay, from the scratch, as well as interfacing with the known electronic components, making it a prototype, right? Similar like alcohol breath meter, okay, and then go for a clinical trial, get the patient's breath print. This is a new term recently been coined, breath print, okay, similar like fingerprint. So acquire breath print, and after that, the majority of Internet of Things, after data acquisition, it exists, right? After data acquisition, Internet of Things, we'll discuss about some artificial intelligence decision making. And I will, if time permits, I will show you a live demo or even hands-on. You can try on the other end, being an open source software. So I'll let you know what are the things happening behind. Okay? So I'm now moving on to sensor performances, how to improve the sensor performances, how these sensors are designed to detect all these parameters. Okay, so you leave bio here, just consider elements of a sensor. Okay, so the first component is the analyte. Analyte in the sense, if I'm going to talk about blood, glucose is my analyte. So something should be there to receive that analyte. Okay, it should specifically bind. Okay, if I'm going to talk about glucose, if my analyte is glucose, I have glucose oxidase peroxidase. That is the receptor. Okay, so it should specifically bind. The analyte and receptor should specifically bind. And once this happens, no, some physical or chemical changes will happen. Okay. Either the intensity of the light changes, or the temperature changes, or the pH change, or some electrical parameters like resistance or voltage or current may change. Okay, initially, if I say I have a cell, say glucose oxidase and peroxidase. Okay, that before the analyte adsorption, that is before binding with the specific analyte, okay, the mass would be lesser. And when the analyte binds, the mass of that particular will be high, right? This is the recognition phase. Once you recognize this, okay, once this receptor an analyte binds and some physical or chemical or electrical changes happen, you need to, right? You need to convert it to a known form. Okay, so when the light changes, so you will identify what is the intensity of light before this binding and what is the intensity of light after binding. If heat changes, that is the temperature changes, what before and what after, so that we can identify the concentration of this analyte here. Okay, similarly, what is the pH change before and after, what is the mass change before and after, what is the resistance change before and after. Similarly, all the physical, chemical and electrical parameters would change, and you need to measure the quantity of electrical change. So that is why we need a transducer, and you will get a signal. All right, we will see each and every block with a case study. So this is a signal. From this signal, you will have an analog signal. You will have to convert that to a digital signal. Medical biosignals that will be in the range of microvolts and millivolts. So you need amplifier. You will get some additional noises. In the sense, some other analyte will also bind with bioreceptor even though your selectivity is high. So that creates some unwanted signals or unwanted noise. So you need some low pass or high pass or band pass, any kind of filters you need here, amplifiers and filters, conversion from analog to, that is analog to digital circuits. So all these comes under this electronics block. And then once these signals are processed, you can give a static display, like directly a number. Glucometer, no, the Accu-Check glucometer, you will get only this number. If you take a smartwatch, okay, you will see how it is varied over the time. Similar like step count example we were talking about. Similarly, heart rate, right? We can see how it is varied over time. So these are the elements of a sensor. Okay. So these sensors can be used in a number of applications. Okay, a number of applications, and for each and every applications, IoT exists here. Okay, so our application, in this particular session, we are going to talk much on healthcare applications. So we have glucometers and pregnancy tests. So for all these things, for pregnancy test, there is similarly an analyte that binds. We have to find the specific receptor. Okay, so that it specifically binds, and some physical, chemical or electrical parameter would change. We tend to measure those physical parameters, have some electronics, that is amplifiers, filters, analog to digital circuits, and see the output. Okay, the customer, the client, they are interested only on the accuracy of detection. They will have a golden standard method, right? This is how some new sensors is being developed from the research and development lab in all the industries. Okay, so for example, if I say glucometers, I have a standard test. So we'll take the Accu-Check example. So how that clears the FDA and it is into the market now. Well, the people who's providing clearance for such kind of products, they will have a golden standard method. In the sense, the existing, take the blood out, centrifuge it, take and do the glucose peroxidase method, and identify what is the glucose. Same sample, you place it in Accu-Check. See how exact it is. Okay. So this will be applicable in healthcare applications, industrial applications, to identify the extent of fermentation in soft drinks and milk products, pathogen detection in fresh meat, and carbohydrates, alcohol, and acids that are present in the packaged foods. This all will be applicable in Food Safety and Security Authority of India, FSSAI. When you see a packaged product, you can see FSSAI approval. Okay, they will do all these processes here. The next one is environmental application. As we have a number of industries, all this goes to any water body sources, all the industrial waste. So that leads to any toxic metals or toxic metals. We drink that, use it for cooking. So for all these processes, then it again affect the health. Similarly, the air quality index, you are aware, right? So that air quality index is being measured by these kind of sensors. So all this sensors, wherever you say sensors, you keep on mind that is data. Sensor is a hardware. It acquires any kind of data, that is a software. We can make it to the cloud. Okay, and with these data, we have to design a particular hardware that is capable of taking any decision or performing any task. So whenever you come across sensor, you think about IoT. And there are numerous other principles. If I say that light intensity changes before and after analyte binding, so we have seen this, right? The physical change, the light intensity changes before and after analyte binding. So these are some classifications of the sensor based on the transduction principle. Okay, if I'm going to measure the change in light intensity, that sensor may be calorimetric sensor or photometric sensor. If I'm going to measure the change in any electrical parameter, that is potentiometric means what is the voltage change before and after analyte binding. Amperometric sensors means the current change. Chemiresistive sensor means the resistance change. Piezoelectric sensors means what is the change in the mass of the that is the receptor before and after analyte binding. Thermometric sensor means change in temperature. Magnetic biosensors means, or magnetic sensors means, it is related to exploitation of any change in magnetic property of our receptor before and after the analyte binding. Similarly, we have this classification types based on the receptors that are available. Okay. So yes, I'm going to discuss about, we know that sensors, it should be very sensitive, right? It should be selective only to the particular biomarker which we are interested in. If it is glucose, it should be selective only to that. It should not detect other compounds that are present. Only then we'll get a true output of how much of glucose present, right? So it should be precise, it should respond fast, and all these are very important. When it comes to medical devices, there is another challenge here. That is the concentration of that biomarker. No, it is very, very, very less. That is in the range of, for diagnosing prostate cancer, the current golden standard method is taking a prostate tissue out. That is doing some biopsy procedure and analyzing on the tissue. Okay. So that is research that is going on. These are some tedious process and it is embarrassing, right? So to make that, researchers are on whether this prostate cancer can be diagnosed in the urine itself. Okay. So for that, there is a prostate sensing antigen that is available only 4 nanogram per ml. In 1 ml, only 4 nanogram of that biomarker is present here. So this is a very challenging one, and along with that, other biomarkers are also present. So the environment for sensing, it is very difficult, and the concentration is very low. So that is why we go for nanotechnology. So you can now understand the multidisciplinary thing here. We have come across the nanotechnology in the sense it is a basic science, physics as well as chemistry, that based on our application, we are engineering it. Okay, we'll discuss all those things. In this slide, I wanted you to understand we are entering into the first discipline. That is, this is a multidisciplinary work. As I told you, this is the first discipline that we are entering. So to give you to make you realize what nanotechnology is, you take a size of a baseball bat and divide it by 100, like you get the size of, right? Now again, you take the diameter of a single needle eye, divide it by 10, you will get the size of the diameter of a single human hair strand. Okay. Now again, take a human strand of diameter divided by 10, you will get the size of the blood cell, which is 10 micrometer. The red blood cells, white blood cells, you have come across all these, right? Platelets. Okay. And then take a single blood cell divided by 10, you will get the size of the bacteria. Again, this is 1 micrometer. We have to go down till nanometers. Being a nanotechnology, we'll go down to nanometers. Take a single bacteria divided by 10, we get the size of a single virus, 100 nanometers. Even though we have come to the nanometer range, nanometer scale, okay, as I told, 4 nanograms. For 4 nanograms, the size of our receptor, this is the receptor, okay. Instead, we have seen the receptor, right? That particular place where this nanotechnology exists. So take this virus and divide it by 100, you will get the size of a single strand of DNA, which is 1 nanometer. So here is the receptor should be in very small scale. Okay. Only then it can identify that very small concentration. You just imagine a gray ball. We are in a how to make you realize this challenge. You just imagine a gray ball amongst the white ball. We have to identify this gray ball covered on the whole football field. You just imagine the complexity behind this. Okay, so for that specific region, we go with the nanotechnology. Okay. I hope you are all aware about Moore's law. So as the time goes, the size of the particular device, that is the number of transistors increase and the size of the device gets decreased, right? Exponentially, both happening exponentially. So yes, we have worked on MEMS, that is micro electromechanical system, and now nano electromechanical system is currently going on. So yes, this is the current research topic here. Okay, not only the size varies, but science plays differently at nanoscale. Okay, if you take a gold ring, okay, when you see through the naked eye, it is yellow in color. But the same gold nanoparticles, when it is in nanoscale, the color changes as the particle size reduces, that is 100 nanometer, 90 nanometer, 80 nanometer, 10 nanometer. As the particle size decreases, the wavelength of absorption is getting increased. The color changes basically, you just understand. The color changes. Okay. The next one, when this nanomaterial is being used as a receptor, so this is the bulk material. The site for interaction here, we have only 6 sites here. When I divide this same block, divide by 8, now I have 8 into 6 sites for our analyte to interact with this particular sensor surface. And similarly, if I divide, go on divide and come to a nanoscale, yeah, you just imagine how much times the surface area for the interaction of the analyte is larger. And this is why we go for nanotechnology for sensing applications. Okay. And also the surface atoms increases. The surface atoms is responsible for the reaction between analyte and the receptor. Okay. And the melting point varies. The same material, if you take, if you take copper, okay, and you make it to the copper you have in the range of 1 centimeter, and you have the same copper in 1 nanometer, right? The melting point of both the things varies. Okay, as the size goes on decrease, the melting point saturates after a certain point of time. Similarly, the gravitational force will vary. 1 centimeter of copper will get influenced by gravitational force, but 1 nanometer, you just imagine, it even cannot be seen through microscope. Will it have a gravitational force? Will it have an effect on 1 nanometer of copper? No. But the electromagnetic force in nanoscale is much higher compared to in the centimeter range. The band gap energy of the same material varies. Okay. The surface energy varies. If the surface energy varies, the analyte is adsorbed effectively. So all these are the examples. The property changes when it goes to nanoscale. Not only the size of our device is getting reduced, but also the properties of that is varying. So we can play with these things. We can engineer the nanomaterials, that is the sensor receptor, based on our application. That is what the takeaway from these slides. And this is an example of how a nanomaterial, graphene, I hope these key term you have heard across a number of times. The business around that is 100 million euros in 2020, and it is set to increase. There are a number of graphene manufacturers across the globe, and you can see the electron mobility, it is much higher than copper. Okay, copper, we use it for these things, right? All the plugs, the cables, the wires. So graphene, the electron mobility is much higher. The thermal conductivity is much higher than diamonds. Okay, diamonds have higher thermal conductivity, and the resistivity, it is much higher. Okay, and it is better than silicon in terms of silicon we use for all the electronic components, right? You can replace it with graphene. For sensor application, it has high surface area. So this same material, you just see it is used in number of applications. It's used for membrane for water purification. So it is used for flexible and stretchable electronics, like patch sensors that we stick it on the skin. So we'll do some fitness work, sweat comes out, and some biomarkers from the sweat would be detected. So for any sensors applications, for coatings, like we have all the Asian paint, something like that, right? It does not have much of the disturbance on the structure of the building. So there are some improvements, right? So similarly, you can use it for fiber. You have heard of all these things, carbon fiber that would not break easily. For that, this graphene can be coated, so it can be used as a coating for energy harvesting and storage, for solar cells application. So a number of application. So the same carbon, right? The same carbon, you see it in pencil tip. Okay, when it is reduced to nanoscale, the properties is enormously increasing, as well as the applications. It can be used in numerous applications. Yes, number of businesses going around graphene, and this tells us the reliability of nanotechnology in a number of applications. So you forget all this. It is basically two kinds of approach. If one is bottom up approach, another one is top down approach. Top down approach, okay, how will you prepare graphene? You take the pencil tip, that is graphite. Okay, you break down and come to a nanoscale. That is top down approach. You take a higher particle size, reduce it to a nanoscale. And what is bottom up approach? You have some precursors, some solutions, some chemicals that are available in chemistry lab. You just have some pressure treatment and heat treatment, and then it will nucleate to a nanoparticle. Okay, so this is top down approach and bottom up approach. There are two ways of preparation. As of now, you just know this. For further interest, we'll discuss something later. So the first one is nanotechnology. Okay, that particular technology is used for sensing biomarkers in exhale breath. Okay, you imagine this is the graphene. Okay, when the patient blows, all the biomarkers comes around, and only the particular thing, maybe take acetone. Acetone alone is interacting with this particular sensor, and it is designed in such a way to detect only acetone. So what is the advantage of non-invasive samples? The same thing. There is no any pain kind of procedures. You can just inhale and exhale. Even the patient is unconsciousness, we can measure all the vitals. Okay. Now the next question is, why this is so difficult when there is a breath alcohol meter that is there for over 2 decades? Okay. The difference here is, here the concentration is very, very, very minute, along with the numerous challenges that we are going to discuss in the forthcoming slides. But the alcohol meter, okay, the range, the alcohol, after ingestion of alcohol, the range of exhaling is higher, much higher. Okay, so that is the difference here. So to give a quick overview on the breath analysis application, there are numerous biomarkers, right? As I told you, like how glucose is being exhaled, there are numerous other compounds that is being exhaled from exhaled human breath. Not only carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen. Okay, not only this, but there are around 3,500 compounds that has been exhaled. I'll also tell you what techniques has been used to detect all these compounds. That varies from hydrocarbons till organic sulfides. So if you take alkane, there are further subclassifications: methane, ethane, propane. If you take alkane, methane, ethene, propane, methylene, ethylene. So similarly, ketones, aldehydes, esters, organic sulfates. So there are number of volatile organic compounds. These are called volatile organic compounds. That is available in the exhale breath, other than these things. Okay. So this is just a study that if a patient tends to exhale ammonia, then there is a renal failure. If a patient tends to, if nitric oxide appears on the breath, then the patient is feeling with some lung problems. Okay, dimethyl sulfide and hydrogen sulfide, that is sulfide, if a patient exhales, then they are prone to halitosis. If they exhale acetone, diabetes. Each and every biomarker that is present in exhale breath, okay, it has certain, it appears. Why it appears? Because of certain fundamental body mechanisms. That is all biochemistry. Okay. So again, dimethyl sulfide, it is chronic liver disease. See the challenge here, for halitosis also dimethyl sulfide, for chronic liver disease also dimethyl sulfide. These are the challenges here. And for heart failure, we tend to exhale pentane. For lung diseases, toluene, benzene, xylene isomers. So there are studies, numerous studies, okay, with an analytical technique. We'll discuss that analytical technique that had identified, okay, how do you identify ammonia from renal failure? How some researchers would have done that? Okay, basically they would have took some 10 healthy patients and 10 patients with renal failure and 10 patients with a number of complications. Okay, they analyze what are their compounds available in exhale breath, and they have identified ammonia is higher in renal failure. This is what has been done from 1970s. Okay, from 1970s this has been done with these kind of equipments, gas chromatography and mass spectrometry. What this does is, based on the mass number, right? You go back to the periodic table, all the this has atomic number and mass number. So based on the mass, if the mass is higher, no, it will take a shorter path. If the mass of the compound is lower, it takes a longer path. If it is in the medium range, it will travel towards this. So the time taken will be higher, right? For a longer path. For a shorter path, the time will be lesser. So based on this time of something that reaches the detector, the particular compound is identified. Basically, you have a lookup table. When it reaches, this particular compound reaches at 2 seconds, say it is acetone. When it reaches within a shorter duration, 1 or 2 seconds, okay, then it is ammonia. Okay, we have a lookup table. So once it reaches the detector at 5 seconds, okay, we'll go to the lookup table and see what particular compound is that, and that will be available here. Similarly, the gas chromatography also is the same thing. So with these techniques, so much of biomarkers has been associated with axial breath, right? This is the equipment which looks like, okay. This is the column where our breath sample would travel and reach the detector. Here is where the breath sample is injected. And for this breath sample to travel towards the detector, we need some carrier gas, that is nitrogen. Nitrogen is an inert gas, so that it helps the breath sample to travel these proteins and reach the detector. So yes, it has high accuracy and all those things, but the disadvantages are it is not portable. We need a trained technician to operate these kind of devices, and for us to analyze a single breath sample, it may take up to 1 hour. Okay, and there is no point of care. That is, it cannot be placed in a clinical setup. Okay, you can collect the breath sample. There are dedicated bags for breath sample. It should not, if we collect the breath sample in a balloon, or we say in a plastic bag, no, it will interact with that material and the compounds will change. So there are dedicated bags to collect this breath samples. So within that bag also, it will stay only up for 6 hours, and then it will react with the bag and provide false responses. So hence huge data cannot be recorded because of this high response time, and it's not portable. So other modes for identifying. With these techniques, what we have done, we have identified these are the biomarkers, and yes, with axial breath, some disease can be diagnosed. Okay, and then this came into picture, photoionization detectors. So you can identify here what happens. This is a laser. So a single pulse of laser is given, and this is a vacuum gas cell, and on the two ends there are photoreflective mirror, right? When a single pulse of laser is given, it reflects back and forth. Okay, it reflects back and forth, and the signal is very strong here. The intensity of the laser is very strong. When breath sample is given as an input, right? This breath sample absorbs this laser and it decays after a certain point of time. That decay time is directly proportional to the concentration. But if I say 266 nanometer laser, it may absorb any compound, right? So the selectivity is issue here, and all these vacuum gas cells, this laser, this reflecting mirror, these detectors is causing higher. Okay, these are just some examples of how breath analysis emerges. Okay, and this is called as a cantilever principle. We have two modes here, static and dynamic mode. Cantilever in the sense, you imagine this as a swimming diving board. Okay, one end is fixed and the other end is free end. Okay, you coat the bioreceptor here. That is, you coat in the sense you paste the bioreceptor on the free end. Okay, ask the patient to blow. If it bends, that bend is directly proportional to the concentration. That is called a static mode. Dynamic mode means you make this vibrate at a particular frequency. When a patient blow, this based on the mass change, the frequency of vibration will reduce, right? The frequency of this vibration will reduce, and based on this reduction in frequency is directly proportional to the concentration. Okay, this bending distance and this frequency change can be detected. How will you detect this? It can be detected by a number of ways. Okay, and then this is our subject interest, that is chemiresistive sensors. So chemiresistive sensors in the sense, the name you can suggest chemi-resistor. There are some chemicals. Those chemicals are nano materials here, nanotechnology, nano materials we have. And based on the analyte of interest, based on the analyte, the resistance change. Okay. See this graph here for an example. That is initially the resistance is around 500 mega ohms. Okay. Then when I inject 1 ppm of acetone, the resistance decreases. Okay. The resistance decreases. This change in resistance is directly proportional to the concentration. First, I'll inject 1 ppm, and then you say first I'll inject one part, and then I'll inject 2 parts, and then I'll inject 3 parts. Like that, I'll inject, and I'll see what is the change here. So I have a table now. Next, what I'm going to do, I'll make the patients blow, and the resistance will change. Okay, if this much of amount of resistance has been changed, I'll go to the lookup table and see, okay, this much has changed, this much of concentration is present. Okay, then the patient is prone to some disease. Okay, acetone means diabetic. The principle behind why this resistance changes and why it is increased, all those principles are based on the redox reaction. Okay, so we need some elevated temperature after the breath sample. Consider this as a breath sample, it is injected. Okay, the number of electrons increases. But here what happens, the electrons, you see here after the atmospheric oxygen getting absorbed on the sensor, the electrons, the oxygen, absorbed oxygen takes the electron. So that is the reason the resistance is high. Once the breath sample is given, it donates electrons to our sensor material, hence the resistance increases. So this is what the principle behind this. These are the challenges which I was talking about. Not only oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. Okay, along with this, only two parts of our biomarker is being exhaled. This is the greatest challenge here. And along with that, environmental acetone or environmental ammonia or environmental nitric oxide, that also interferes our study.